The skyline was a bleeding wound of neon, and Gabriel Mercer owned every inch of it. But tonight, the man who commanded an empire stopped dead in his tracks because of a crumpled cardigan and a cold cup of coffee. His untouchable secretary was asleep at her desk. It was a mistake. In his world, vulnerability was a death sentence. By dawn, the blood on the floor wouldn't be hers, and the lines they crossed could never be redrawn. Listen closely. The 42nd floor of the Mercer Tower didn't just hum, it breathed. It was a low mechanical respiration of servers and central heating, a sound Evelyn Cross usually tuned out by hour 9 of her shift. Tonight it was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. It was 2:14 a.m. Evelyn stared at the dual monitors. Columns of offshore accounts blurred into a meaningless stream of blue light. She wasn't an accountant, but Gabriel Mercer didn't hire people for what they were on paper. He hired them for what they were willing to ignore. For 3 years, Evelyn had been ignoring the impossible transit speeds of the shipping containers, the unexplained cash infusions from holding companies in Cyprus, and the fact that men with broken knuckles frequently bypassed her desk to see the boss. She rubbed her eyes. The friction burned. Her spine felt like a column of shattered glass, aching from sitting in the ergonomic chair that never quite lived up to its price tag. Just 3 more ledgers. Just enough to ensure the audit on Monday found nothing but sterile, boring corporate competence. A heavy, suffocating wave of exhaustion crashed over her. It wasn't the polite tiredness of a long day. It was the bone-deep weariness of a woman who had been carrying her sister's medical debt, an eviction notice, and the weight of a criminal enterprise's paperwork on her shoulders for 36 months. Evelyn rested her forehead against the cool, polished mahogany of her desk. Just for a second. She closed her eyes. The blue light faded. The mechanical breathing of the floor pulled her under. Downstairs, the private elevator chimed in the subterranean garage. Gabriel Mercer stepped out. He moved like a man who owned the concrete he walked on. His charcoal suit, bespoke and immaculate, was ruined. Rainwater darkened the shoulders, and a smear of something rust-colored and sticky stained the left cuff. He smelled of ozone, cold asphalt, and cheap copper. It had been a bad night at the docks. A dispute over territory had escalated. Gabriel had ended it permanently, but the adrenaline had left him feeling hollowed out, carrying a bitter taste in the back of his throat. He hated the noise of the city down there. He hated the predictable greed of desperate men. He wanted the sterile, untouchable quiet of his office. He keyed his access card into the executive lift. The doors slid shut, sealing him away from the violence. 42 floors up. When the doors parted, Gabriel didn't expect the lights. The reception area was supposed to be a cavern of shadows at this hour. Instead, the soft, ambient glow of desk lamps cut through the dark. He froze. His hand drifted instinctively to the cold weight of the Sig Sauer holstered at his hip. A muscle in his jaw feathered. He stepped onto the thick carpet, his footfalls entirely silent. He cleared the corner, his eyes sweeping the open floor plan, anticipating an ambush. He found a woman curled over a keyboard. Gabriel let his hand drop from his waist. He let out a slow, measured breath. It was Cross. Evelyn. He stood 10 feet away watching her. In the daylight, Evelyn Cross was a machine. She wore severe blouses, kept her hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, and spoke in clipped, efficient sentences. She guarded his schedule like a junkyard dog and processed millions in illicit funds without ever letting a tremor show in her hands. Right now she looked fragile. Her head was pillowed on her forearms. A strand of dull brown hair had escaped its ruthless bun and fell across her cheek. The glow of the monitors painted her pale skin in harsh, unflattering light, highlighting the deep purple bruises of exhaustion under her eyes. She was wearing a cheap, slightly frayed grey cardigan over her silk blouse. It looked out of place in his billion-dollar ivory tower. Gabriel walked closer. He noticed the half-empty cup of black coffee, a thin film of oil resting on the surface. He noticed the red ink pen she was still clutching in her right hand, her knuckles white, even in sleep. And then he looked at the monitors. She was reconciling the Shell Company accounts from the Palermo shipment. The shipment that had almost gotten him killed 2 hours ago. She was burying the evidence. A strange, unfamiliar tightness gripped Gabriel's chest. It wasn't gratitude. Men like Gabriel didn't feel gratitude. They felt leverage. But this was different. He paid her to do a job, yes. He paid her very well. But nobody stayed until 2 a.m. out of loyalty to a paycheck. He stood over her. He could hear the soft, shallow rhythm of her breathing. He saw a small smudge of blue ink on her left jawline. She shifted slightly, a soft sigh escaping her parted lips, and for the first time in 3 years, Gabriel Mercer saw his secretary as a human being. It was a dangerous realization. People were assets or liabilities. Humanity made things messy. He should wake her, tell her to go home, reprimand her for a security violation. Instead, Gabriel slowly took off his ruined suit jacket. The jacket was heavy. It smelled of rain-expensive cedar cologne and the faint metallic tang of blood. Gabriel draped it over her shoulders with an unnatural gentleness. He was a man accustomed to breaking things, to tearing them down. His hands felt clumsy, performing an act of care. Evelyn jerked awake instantly. It wasn't a slow, groggy ascent to consciousness. It was a violent snap. She pushed herself back, the wheels of her chair catching on the carpet. The sudden movement dislodged the jacket, but she caught it before it hit the floor. Her eyes wide and completely dilated, locked onto Gabriel. Panic flared in her chest, hot and suffocating. It was Gabriel Mercer. He was standing too close. The pristine illusion of the office was shattered by the state of him. His tie was gone. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, exposing the edge of a dark tattoo on his collarbone. And his eyes, usually a flat, dead grey, were dark, calculating, and fixed entirely on her. Mr. Mercer. Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat desperation, making her movements jerky as she reached for her mouse. I apologize. I was just the Palermo files. The transit dates were misaligned by 72 hours. I needed to manually adjust the ledger before the European markets opened. She was babbling. She knew she was babbling. Gabriel didn't look at the monitors. He didn't look at the files. He looked at her hands, trembling slightly as they gripped the edge of the desk. "It's almost 3 a.m, Evelyn," he said. His voice was a low rumble, rougher than usual, scraping against the quiet of the office. She flinched at the use of her first name. He had never called her Evelyn. It was always Miss Cross. "I lost track of time," she lied. She clutched his jacket in her lap. Her fingers brushed the left cuff. It was damp. She looked down. The rusty stain transferred a faint, dark smear to her own pale skin. She stopped breathing. The air in the room suddenly felt entirely drained of oxygen. She knew what he did. Of course she knew. But she only saw the numbers, the sterile, clean digits on a screen. This was real. This was the physical cost of those numbers. Gabriel tracked her gaze. He saw her look at the blood. He didn't offer an excuse. He didn't pull away. He just watched her, waiting to see if she would break. Evelyn slowly looked up from the stain. She met his eyes. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. The panic in her chest solidified into something cold and hard. Survival instinct. "The files are done," she said, her voice dropping an octave, losing the nervous secretary tremor. "The accounts balance. There is no trace of the missing 72 hours. Gabriel's eyes narrowed. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed his face, quickly buried. She wasn't running. She was showing him she was useful. He turned away from her desk and walked toward the small private bar built into the mahogany bookshelves. He grabbed 2 heavy crystal tumblers and a bottle of 20-year-old scotch. He poured 2 generous measures. "Come here," he commanded. Evelyn hesitated. She looked at the elevator doors, then at the man pouring liquor. She stood up. The jacket slipped from her lap, but she caught it again, instinctively pulling it around her shoulders. It was freezing in the office, and the wool was warm. She walked over to the bar. Gabriel handed her a glass. His knuckles brushed hers. His skin was ice cold. "Drink," he said. She took a sip. The scotch burned a fiery path down her throat, settling heavily in her empty stomach. It made her eyes water, but it stopped the trembling in her hands. Gabriel leaned against the bar, taking a slow drink from his own glass. "You're shielding the Palermo run," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Do you know what was in those containers, Evelyn?" "It's not my job to know," she replied, staring into a glass. "My job is to make sure the numbers on the screen keep the IRS and the Port Authority from asking questions. I asked if you knew." She looked up at him. The cynical, brutal Mafia boss and the exhausted, invisible secretary. The pretense of the corporate world burned away under the ambient desk lights. "Guns," she said quietly. "Or something worse. Given the hazard pay routed to the drivers, something that required discretion." Gabriel let out a short, humorless exhale. "And you sit here in your cheap sweater burying the paper trail for men who would cut your throat for $100. Why?" Evelyn felt a flash of anger. The insult about the sweater stung more than it should have. "Because the medical bills for my sister's dialysis are $40,000 a month," she snapped, the truth slipping out before she could lock it down. "Because you pay me $80, and because I'm very, very good at keeping things buried." Silence stretched between them. The mechanical hum of the building seemed to grow louder. Gabriel stared at her. He stripped away the layers of his perception. She wasn't a drone. She was a mercenary. Just like him. Only her loyalty wasn't bought with fear. It was bought with blood. Her sister's blood. He reached out slowly. Evelyn stiffened, but didn't pull away. He raised his hand and brushed the pad of his thumb against her jawline, wiping away the smudge of blue ink. The touch was electric, jarringly intimate. "You're too smart for your own good, Evelyn," he murmured, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "I'm just doing my job," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs, so hard she thought he could hear it. "No," Gabriel said, taking a step closer. The scent of rain and violence enveloped her. "Your job was done at 6 p.m. This," he gestured to the dark office, to the jacket wrapped around her, to the glass in her hand. "This is something else." He took her glass from her hand and set it on the bar. He was towering over her. The space between them evaporated. Evelyn felt a terrifying magnetic pull. She had spent 3 years making herself invisible to this man. Tonight, under the neon bleed of the Chicago sky, he was seeing every single part of her, and he didn't look like he wanted to look away. The moment hung suspended fragile as spun sugar. Gabriel's hand lingered near her face. Evelyn couldn't breathe. The air felt heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hairs on her arms stand up. She saw the minute exhaustion lines around his eyes, the slight unsteadiness in his breathing. He was bleeding from a cut near his hairline she hadn't noticed before. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to her lips. A sharp metallic clack echoed through the silent floor. Gabriel's entire posture changed in a fraction of a second. The intimacy vanished, replaced by a cold, predatory tension. He didn't just step back. He shifted, pushing Evelyn behind him, with one forceful sweep of his arm. "Get down!" he hissed. Evelyn hit the floor hard, her knees taking the brunt of the impact. The heavy wool of his jacket pooled around her. She scrambled under the overhang of the mahogany bar. Gabriel. Silence. It was a command that brooked no argument. The sound had come from the service elevator, the one at the far end of the floor usually reserved for the cleaning crew. It was a manual freight lift. It didn't chime, but the heavy metal grate had just been slid open. Gabriel drew the Sig Sauer. The movement was fluid, practiced. He didn't check the chamber. He knew his weapon. He melted into the shadows near the corner of the hallway, leading to the executive suites. Evelyn pressed her hands over her mouth. Her heart felt like a trapped bird beating against her sternum. The alcohol in her system was useless against the sudden sheer terror. Footsteps. Heavy tactical. Rubber soles on the plush carpet. Not one person. 2. Maybe 3. They weren't security. Building security carried flashlights and walked with the lazy cadence of men who expected empty rooms. These men moved with deadly synchronized purpose. "Check the corner office," a low, gravelly voice muttered. The accent was thick Russian, maybe. "Light on at the desk. Someone's here." Evelyn realized with a sickening jolt that her monitors were still glowing. Her coffee cup was still steaming slightly. She held her breath until her lungs burned. From her vantage point beneath the bar, she could only see a slice of the hallway. A shadow fell across the carpet. A man stepped into view. He was holding a suppressed submachine gun, the barrel sweeping the room. He took a step toward Evelyn's desk. Gabriel stepped out from the dark. He didn't yell. He didn't issue a warning. Puffed. Puffed. 2 muffled concussive pops. The man dropped like a stone, his weapon clattering uselessly against the edge of Evelyn's desk. The heavy thud of dead weight hitting the floor shook the ground beneath Evelyn's hands. "Contact," a voice yelled from the corridor. Gunfire erupted. It wasn't suppressed. The deafening roar of an assault rifle tore through the silence of the 42nd floor. Glass shattered. The heavy crystal tumblers on the bar above Evelyn exploded, raining sharp fragments and scotch down on her back. She curled into a tighter ball, burying her face in her knees. Gabriel returned fire. Measured, precise shots. He was moving shifting angles, drawing their fire away from the bar. The smell of cordite filled the air, acrid and choking. It smelled like burnt sulfur and copper. The drywall disintegrated under the barrage of bullets. Evelyn clamped her eyes shut. 3 years, she thought hysterically. 3 years of ledgers and spreadsheets, and this is how it ends. Shot under a minibar because I didn't want to leave my desk. The gunfire stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was worse. It was thick, ringing with the aftershocks of violence. "Clear!" Gabriel's voice rang out. It was breathless, tight with adrenaline. Evelyn didn't move. She couldn't. Her muscles were locked in a state of primal paralysis. Footsteps approached. Slow, heavy. A hand reached under the bar and grasped her shoulder. She flinched violently, letting out a stifled sob. "It's me. It's done. Come out." Gabriel pulled her out from under the counter. The office was a war zone. The floor-to-ceiling windows behind her desk had spider-webbed, held together only by the security film. Drywall dust hung in the air like a thick fog. 2 bodies lay motionless on the carpet. Blood was pooling, sinking into the expensive fibers, dark and slick. Evelyn stared at the bodies. Her stomach rebelled. She swayed on her feet, the nausea hitting her in a violent wave. Gabriel caught her by the waist before she could collapse. His grip was bruising. "Look at me," he ordered. She couldn't. She was staring at the dead man by her chair. Gabriel grabbed her chin, forcing her head up, making her look him in the eye. "Evelyn, look at me." She met his gaze. He was covered in plaster dust. His white shirt was splattered with blood that wasn't his. His eyes were wide, feral, entirely stripped of the composed, untouchable facade of the CEO. He was the monster she had always pretended he wasn't. "Are you hit?" he asked, his voice rough. She shook her head mutely. He let out a ragged breath and pulled her against his chest. It wasn't a romantic embrace. It was the desperate, crushing hold of a man anchoring himself to the only living thing left in the room. Evelyn felt the heavy, frantic pounding of his heart against her cheek. She smelled the gunpowder, the sweat, the copper. Slowly, hesitantly, her arms wrapped around his waist. She held on to him. She was holding on to the devil, and he was the only thing keeping her safe. Over Gabriel's shoulder, Evelyn saw the first pale grey light of dawn creeping through the shattered windows. It cut through the dust, illuminating the ruin of her office. The neat stacks of paper were scattered. The dual monitors were dark, hit by stray bullets. Her cheap cardigan, the one he had draped over her, was stained with scotch and blood. The old world was dead. The quiet, invisible life of Evelyn Cross, the efficient secretary, was bleeding out on the carpet alongside the men Gabriel had just killed. He pulled back slightly, looking down at her. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a raw, charged silence between them. He didn't let go of her waist. "We have to leave," Gabriel said quietly. "My cleanup crew will be here in 10 minutes, but the police will follow the noise. You can't be here." "Where?" She swallowed hard, her throat raw. "Where do we go?" He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the terror, but he also saw the iron core of resilience that had kept her sitting at that desk for 3 years. She hadn't run. She hadn't screamed. She had handed him his jacket. "With me," Gabriel said. "It wasn't an offer. It was a claim." He laced his fingers through hers. His hand was warm now, slick with sweat. Evelyn squeezed his hand back. As they walked past the bodies and stepped into the private elevator, the morning sun broke over the skyline, washing the city in gold and blood-red light. By morning, everything had changed. Gabriel drove a matte black Audi RS7. It moved through the pre-dawn streets of Chicago, not like a vehicle, but like an apex predator returning to its den. The city was a ghost town, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of streetlights. Inside the car, the silence was absolute, heavy with the phantom ring of gunfire. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat, staring blankly out the window. Gabriel's ruined suit jacket was still clutched tightly around her shoulders. She felt cold, a deep, bone-chilling cold that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was shock. Her mind was a skipping record, looping the same 3 seconds, the metallic clack of the elevator, the concussive pop of the suppressed gun, the dead man falling against her desk. She looked down at her hands. There was a smear of dried blood on her right knuckle. Not hers. Gabriel drove with one hand resting lightly on the steering wheel, his eyes scanning the mirrors with paranoid intensity. He had stripped off his bloodied white shirt and tossed it in the trunk before they left the garage, pulling on a dark grey t-shirt he kept in a gym bag. The casual clothing made him look younger, rougher, more dangerous. Without the armor of his tailored suits, the violent reality of his life was written plainly in the corded muscle of his arms and the dark ink sprawling across his collarbone. He didn't speak to her. He didn't offer comfort. Evelyn realized he didn't know how. He was a man who solved problems with violence and money. He couldn't shoot the shock out of her system, and he couldn't pay it to leave. They crossed the river heading west, away from the glittering skyscrapers, and into a neighborhood where the buildings squatted low and the streetlights were mostly broken. Gabriel pulled into a narrow, unassuming alleyway behind a row of dilapidated brick warehouses. The heavy steel door of a garage rolled up automatically as they approached. The interior was surprisingly pristine, a cavernous, brightly lit space that housed a vintage Mustang and a collection of high-end motorcycles. It smelled of engine oil and floor wax. Gabriel cut the engine. He turned to look at her. "We stay here until I figure out who bought the hit," he said, his voice flat. Evelyn nodded slowly. She reached for the door handle, but her fingers were numb. They fumbled against the polished metal. Gabriel let out a sharp sigh. He opened his door, walked around the front of the car, and opened hers. He reached in, grasped her upper arms, and pulled her out. His touch was firm grounding. "Walk," he instructed. He led her to a heavy steel door at the back of the garage. It opened into a stark, minimalist apartment. It was a safe house. It looked like a luxury hotel room that had been stripped of all personality. Leather furniture, grey walls, bulletproof glass over the single window. "Bathroom is through there. Take a shower. Wash the dust off. There are clean clothes in the closet. My sizes, but they'll do." Evelyn just stood in the center of the living room. The adrenaline crash was hitting her now, a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. Her knees felt like water. She swayed. Gabriel caught her shoulders before she could fall. "Evelyn," she looked up at him. Her eyes were swimming with unshed tears. "My sister," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I have to call my sister. I have to go to the hospital. Today is Tuesday. I always visit her on Tuesdays." The hardened mask of the Mafia boss slipped just a fraction. Gabriel stared at the terrified, exhausted woman holding on to him. He knew about the sister. He knew about the medical debt. That was why she was on his payroll. He bought loyalty by solving desperate problems. But he had never had to deal with the messy human reality of it. "You can't call her," Gabriel said, his voice softer than he intended. "They hit my office. They know who you are. If they traced the hit, they traced my employees. The hospital isn't safe. She needs me." Evelyn insisted, a note of hysteria creeping into her voice. She tried to pull away from his grip. "She's sick, Gabriel. I'm all she has. If you go to that hospital, you're dead. And if they find you there, she's dead too." He didn't sugarcoat it. He couldn't afford to. Evelyn stopped struggling. The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. She sagged against him, a dry sob tearing from her throat. She buried her face in his chest, her hands clenching the fabric of his t-shirt. Gabriel froze. He was unaccustomed to comfort. Women in his world didn't cry on his chest. They schemed, they negotiated, or they screamed. He stood rigidly for a moment, his arms hovering awkwardly. Then, slowly, heavily, he wrapped his arms around her. He pressed his face into the crown of her head. She smelled like cheap vanilla shampoo and gunpowder. "I have men at the hospital," Gabriel murmured into her hair. "Plain clothes. They've been there since you started working for me. Nobody will touch her. I swear it on my life." Evelyn stilled. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him, her tear-streaked face a mixture of shock and confusion. You put guards on my sister. You handled my money, Evelyn," he said, avoiding her gaze. "You were a vulnerability. I secure my vulnerabilities." It was a cold, calculated explanation, but the way his hand lingered on her waist betrayed a different truth. He hadn't just secured a vulnerability. He had protected something she loved. "Go shower," he ordered softly, stepping back and breaking the contact. The loss of his warmth made Evelyn shiver. "We have work to do." An hour later, Evelyn emerged from the bathroom. She was wearing a pair of Gabriel's black sweatpants, rolled up 3 times at the waist and ankles, and a soft grey, long-sleeved shirt that hung past her thighs. The hot water had scrubbed away the plaster dust and the smell of death, but it couldn't wash away the exhaustion etched deep into her features. She found Gabriel sitting at the sleek glass dining table. He had a laptop open, a secure, encrypted phone to his ear, and a blueprint of the Mercer Tower spread out in front of him. A steaming mug of black coffee sat across from him. He didn't look up as she sat down, but he pushed the mug toward her. "I want the port manifests from the last 6 months, cross-referenced with the holding companies. If the Russians are making a play, they needed capital. Find the leak." Gabriel barked into the phone, then ended the call abruptly. He finally looked at her. He took in her appearance, the oversized clothes, the damp hair plastered to her skull, the hollow look in her eyes. Drink the coffee. Eat. He nudged a plate holding a hastily assembled sandwich toward her. Evelyn picked up the mug. The warmth seeped into her cold hands. Who were they? She asked quietly. Bratva. The Volkov Syndicate, Gabriel replied, tracing a line on the blueprint with a pen. They run the eastern seaboard. They've been trying to push into Chicago for 2 years. I've pushed back. The Palermo shipment, Evelyn guessed. The puzzle pieces from the ledgers were clicking into place, connecting the sterile numbers to the violence she had witnessed. It wasn't your shipment. You intercepted it. Gabriel paused, his pen hovering over the paper. He looked at her, a slow, dark smirk curving his lips. You really are too smart for your own good, Miss Cross. Stop calling me that. She snapped, surprising herself. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a strange, reckless clarity. My name is Evelyn, and considering I just watched you kill 2 men in front of my desk, I think we're past the formal titles. Gabriel's smirk widened. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. Evelyn, then? Yes. The shipment belonged to Volkov. He was bringing in heavy ordnance. I took it. I sold it back to the cartel down south. Volkov didn't appreciate the insult, so he sent a hit squad to your office. He sent them to send a message. They weren't supposed to find me. They were supposed to find my files, my ledgers. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. They were looking for what you spent the last 3 years hiding. Evelyn stared at him. The reality of her job had always been an abstraction. Now it was a target painted on her back. If they wanted the ledgers, why did they shoot at me? Because you were at the desk, Gabriel said bluntly. You were an obstacle. To men like Volkov, an obstacle is just something to put a bullet in. He saw the fear flare in her eyes again and regretted his harshness. He reached across the table, his large hand covering hers, silencing the slight tremor in her fingers. They won't get to you. I won't let them. It wasn't a promise born of corporate responsibility. It was a vow. I need your help, Evelyn, Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a low, serious register. My men are tearing the city apart, looking for Volkov's local lieutenant. But the money leaves a trail my enforcers can't follow. You know the accounts. You know the flow. I need you to find where Volkov is funneling his capital in Chicago. If we find his bank, we find him. Evelyn pulled her hand away, wrapping both hands around her coffee mug. She looked down at the dark liquid. She was a secretary, a glorified bookkeeper. She had spent her life trying to stay invisible, trying to pay the bills, trying to keep her sister alive. Now the head of the Chicago syndicate was asking her to help him hunt down a Russian mob boss. If I do this, Evelyn said, her voice shaking slightly, but her gaze steady when she met his eyes. If I find him, what happens? I end it, Gabriel stated simply. I tear him out by the roots, and then you go back to your life. The debt is cleared. The medical bills are paid forever. You walk away clean. It was the deal of a lifetime. It was a lie. She knew it, and he knew it. The moment she saw him pull the trigger, the moment he had wrapped his jacket around her, the moment he had held her in the dark, she couldn't walk away clean. The blood was already on her hands. Evelyn set the mug down. She pulled the laptop toward her. Give me the encrypted drive, she said. Gabriel watched her. The fragile, exhausted woman was gone. In her place was the mercenary he had hired 3 years ago. But now her eyes held the same cold, calculating light he saw in his own reflection. He handed her a small black flash drive. She plugged it in. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing security protocols, pulling up the offshore accounts. The blue light of the screen washed over her face, turning her pale skin luminous. For the next 4 hours, the only sound in the safe house was the frantic clicking of keys. Gabriel paced the room, making hushed phone calls, organizing his soldiers, locking down his territory. But his eyes kept returning to Evelyn. She was a machine. She traced shell companies through Panama, bounced IP addresses off servers in Switzerland, and dug through layers of encrypted transactions that would have taken the FBI weeks to decipher. "Got him," Evelyn said suddenly. Her voice was hoarse. Gabriel crossed the room in 3 strides, leaning over her shoulder, resting his hand on the back of her chair. His proximity was distracting, his heat radiating through his thin shirt. "Show me." She pointed to a convoluted diagram on the screen. "He's not using a bank. He's using a front. A high-end real estate development firm in the Gold Coast. Ethelgard Holdings. They've been buying up distressed properties, inflating the renovation costs, and washing the cash through offshore contractors. The money for the hit squad, it came from an expedited consulting fee paid out 2 days ago." Gabriel stared at the screen. A dark, terrifying smile spread across his face. He leaned down his lips, brushing against her ear. "You're a terrifying woman, Evelyn." She shivered the warmth of his breath, sending a jolt straight to her core. She turned her head slightly. Their faces were inches apart. The sterile light of the laptop illuminated the raw, undeniable tension between them. "I learned from the best," she whispered. He didn't pull away. He looked at her mouth. The urge to kiss her, to claim the fire he saw burning in her eyes, was overwhelming. His encrypted phone buzzed violently on the table, shattering the moment. Gabriel cursed under his breath, straightening up and snatching the phone. "Yeah." He listened for 10 seconds. The color drained from his face. The cold, calculating boss vanished, replaced by a man looking at total ruin. "Get a team there now. Do not engage until I arrive." He hung up. He looked at Evelyn. The terror in his eyes was contagious. "What is it?" she asked, her heart dropping into her stomach. "The men guarding your sister?" Gabriel said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "They just went dark. Volkov knows where she is." Panic wasn't an emotion Evelyn could afford right now. It was a luxury for people who had time to survive. She felt the blood rush from her extremities, leaving her cold and numb. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She stood up. "Give me a gun," she demanded. Gabriel was already moving, pulling a heavy tactical vest from a duffel bag in the corner. He strapped it on over his t-shirt. He checked the magazine of his Sig Sauer, slammed it home, and racked the slide. "No." He didn't even look at her. "You stay here. The door is biometric. It won't open for anyone but me. If I'm not back in 2 hours, there's a burner phone in the kitchen drawer. Call the number in the contacts. A man named Silas will get you out of the city." "Gabriel, she is my sister." Evelyn grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his muscle. "I am not sitting in a bunker, while some Russian psychopath uses her as leverage against you." He turned on her, his eyes blazing with a ferocity that made her step back. "You are a liability in a firefight, Evelyn. You don't know how to clear a room. You don't know how to take a life. You freeze, you die. And if you die, I have no reason to hold back. I found him." She spat back her own anger, mirroring his. "I tracked his money. I gave you the target. You owe me." Gabriel stared at her. The air crackled between them. He grabbed her shoulders, pulling her hard against his chest. It was a violent, desperate motion. "I am trying to keep you alive." He snarled, his face inches from hers. "I don't care about being alive if she dies," Evelyn whispered, tears finally breaking free, sliding down her cheeks. "Please, let me go with you. I know the layout of the dialysis ward. I know where the blind spots are in the security cameras. You need me." He studied her face. He saw the absolute, terrifying resolve in her eyes. It was the same resolve that kept her at her desk at 2 a.m. She wouldn't break. Gabriel swore violently in Italian. He shoved her away, walked over to the duffel bag and pulled out a small, sleek Glock 43. He checked the chamber, engaged the safety, and handed it to her. Safety is here. Don't touch the trigger until you're ready to kill someone. He grabbed a smaller, lightweight Kevlar vest. Put this on under the shirt. Now. 3 minutes later, the matte black Audi tore out of the alleyway, its tires screaming against the asphalt. The drive to St. Jude's Medical Center was a blur of running red lights and desperate silence. Evelyn sat rigidly, the cold weight of the Glock burning a hole in her pocket. She felt sick. The world had tilted on its axis, and she was falling into the dark. The dialysis ward is on the 3rd floor north wing, she said, her voice eerily calm. There are 3 entrances. Main elevator service elevator and the fire stairs at the end of the hall. The security desk is near the main elevators. They usually only have 1 guard on duty at night. Gabriel nodded, his jaw clenched tight. He was driving with terrifying precision, pushing the car to its absolute limits. Volkov won't send an army to a hospital, Gabriel said, his eyes scanning the streets ahead. It's too public. He'll send a precision team. 4 men, maybe 5. They'll use suppressors. They want it quiet. They want you, Evelyn realized. They took the guards out to draw you in. Yes, it's a trap. Yes. Gabriel slammed on the brakes, pulling the Audi into an empty parking structure a block away from the hospital. He killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. He turned to her. In the dim light of the parking garage, his face was carved out of shadow and stone. He reached out and cupped her face. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone, a fleeting, desperate touch. You stay behind me, he ordered. You do exactly what I say. If I tell you to run, you run. You don't look back. Do you understand me? Evelyn looked into his eyes. The dead, flat grey was gone, replaced by a dark, agonizing fear. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of failing her. I understand, she lied. They moved out of the garage, sticking to the shadows. The hospital loomed ahead, a massive structure of glass and concrete. The emergency room entrance was brightly lit, but the north wing was dark and silent. Gabriel bypassed the main doors. He led her to a side entrance, a heavy steel door marked "Staff Only." He pulled a small set of lockpicks from his pocket. 10 seconds later, the door clicked open. They slipped inside. The smell of antiseptic and floor wax hit Evelyn, a nauseating reminder of the countless hours she had spent in this building. The service elevator was too exposed. Gabriel pointed to the fire stairs. They began the climb. 3 flights. They moved silently, the rubber soles of Gabriel's boots making no sound on the concrete. At the 3rd floor landing, Gabriel held up a hand, signaling her to stop. He pressed his ear against the heavy metal door. He closed his eyes, listening intently. Evelyn watched him. He was terrifyingly beautiful in this element. A creature designed for violence, moving with a lethal, hypnotic grace. Gabriel slowly pushed the door open just an inch. He peered through the crack. He stepped back, turning to Evelyn. He held up 2 fingers. 2 men in the hallway. He drew his gun. He didn't look back. He kicked the door open. The violence was instantaneous and absolute. Gabriel stepped into the hallway. 2 muffled shots tore through the sterile silence. Evelyn flinched, clamping her hands over her ears. She heard a heavy thud, followed immediately by another. "Clear," Gabriel hissed. Evelyn stepped through the door. 2 men lay in the hallway dressed in dark scrubs. They weren't doctors. They were dead. Gabriel was already moving, sweeping his gun down the corridor. "Which room?" he demanded. 314, halfway down on the right. They moved swiftly. The hallway was agonizingly long. Every closed door felt like a threat. They reached 314. The door was slightly ajar. Gabriel positioned himself against the wall beside the frame. He looked at Evelyn, his eyes burning with silent instruction. "Stay here." He pivoted, kicking the door wide open and raising his weapon in a single fluid motion. A voice rang out from inside the room. A thick, gravelly voice. "Drop the weapon, Mercer, or I put a bullet in her head." Evelyn's heart stopped. She peered around Gabriel's shoulder. Inside the dim hospital room, her sister Sarah lay asleep in the bed, hooked up to the hum of the dialysis machine. Standing over her was a massive, scarred man holding a suppressed pistol directly against Sarah's temple. Volkov's lieutenant. Gabriel stood frozen in the doorway. His gun was leveled at the man's chest, but he couldn't take the shot. Not with the gun to Sarah's head. "Drop it!" The Russian repeated, a cruel smile twisting his face. "The boss sends his regards for the Palermo shipment." Gabriel's jaw feathered. He slowly lowered his weapon. "Gabriel, no." Evelyn breathed panic, clawing at her throat. The Russian looked past Gabriel and saw Evelyn. His smile widened into a predatory grin. "Ah, the secretary. The boss will be pleased." Two birds. Gabriel slowly bent his knees, preparing to set the gun on the floor. Evelyn didn't think. She didn't calculate the odds. She saw the man who was going to kill her sister. She saw the man who was going to kill Gabriel. She stepped out from behind Gabriel. She raised the Glock 43. Her hands were shaking violently, but she remembered Gabriel's words. "Don't touch the trigger until you're ready to kill someone." She was ready. The Russian's eyes widened in surprise as he saw the small, terrified woman pointing a gun at him. He shifted his aim, pulling the gun away from Sarah's head to point it at Evelyn. It was a fatal mistake, a half-second distraction. Gabriel moved with impossible speed. He didn't drop his gun. He brought it up in a blinding arc. Crack. Gabriel fired. The bullet took the Russian squarely between the eyes before he could pull the trigger on Evelyn. The massive man crumpled backward his gun, clattering to the linoleum floor. The silence that rushed back into the room was deafening. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic beeping of Sarah's heart monitor. She hadn't even woken up. The suppressors had done their job. Evelyn stood frozen, the Glock still aimed at the dead man. Her entire body was trembling. She had almost pulled the trigger. She had crossed the line. Gabriel walked over to her. He gently took the gun from her rigid hands, engaged the safety, and slipped it into his pocket. He didn't say a word. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She clung to him, sobbing violently against his chest, her tears soaking his shirt. The Mafia boss and the secretary, bound by blood, forged in fire. They stood in the dark hospital room, surrounded by death, holding on to the only thing that felt real. By morning, everything had changed, and there was no going back. The heart monitor maintained its steady, ignorant rhythm. Sarah slept on, oblivious to the dead man bleeding out on the linoleum a few feet from her bed. Evelyn stepped back from Gabriel's chest. The fabric of his shirt was damp with her tears, but her eyes were dry now. The hysterical panic had burned off, leaving behind a cold, crystallized clarity. She looked at the Glock resting in his pocket. She looked at the body. "We have to move her," Evelyn said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the tremor that had shaken her frame a minute ago. Gabriel studied her face. He recognized the shift. It was the same deadening of the soul he had experienced at 19, the first time he had to pull a trigger to keep what was his. A part of him mourned for the civilian she had been just 4 hours ago. The rest of him was intensely relieved she had survived the transition. "My extraction team is 3 minutes out," Gabriel replied, pulling a burner phone from his pocket and sending a single text. "They have a private ambulance. We're moving her to a secure clinic I own in the suburbs. Fully staffed, completely off the grid. The Bratva doesn't know it exists." Evelyn nodded. She didn't ask questions. She walked over to her sister's bed and began carefully detaching the secondary IV lines, leaving only the essential ports connected. Her hands were perfectly steady. Gabriel watched her work. She was methodical, efficient. The secretary who managed his schedule was managing an extraction from a murder scene. "Evelyn," he said quietly. She paused, looking over her shoulder. "You stepped in front of a gun for me." It wasn't a question, but he needed to hear the reasoning. In his world, people took bullets for money, for fear, or for blood oaths, not for their boss. He was going to kill Sarah, she replied, turning back to the IV stand. He was aiming at me. You drew his fire. She stopped. Her fingers rested against the cool plastic of the medical tubing. She didn't look at him when she finally answered. You're the only thing standing between us and men like him. If you die, we die. It was a calculated risk. It was a lie. They both knew it. The math of the situation had vanished the moment he had wrapped his blood-stained jacket around her shoulders. But Gabriel let her have the lie. She needed the armor. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, swift and disciplined. 3 men in tactical gear stepped into the room. They didn't spare a glance at the dead Russian on the floor. They looked directly at Gabriel. Clear the route, Gabriel ordered. Get the girl onto the gurney. We move in 60 seconds. The men moved with practiced precision. Within minutes, Sarah was transferred her machinery loaded onto a portable battery unit. They rolled her out into the dark hallway, stepping carefully over the bodies. Evelyn walked beside the gurney, her hand resting over her sister's frail fingers. Gabriel walked directly behind Evelyn. His gun was drawn again, his eyes scanning every shadow, every open doorway. He was a shield of Kevlar and violence at her back. They reached the service elevator. They descended to the loading dock where an unmarked ambulance was waiting, its engine purring in the damp night air. As the paramedics loaded Sarah into the back, Gabriel caught Evelyn's arm. You go with her, he said. The clinic is a fortress. You stay there until I give the all clear. Evelyn looked at the dark maw of the ambulance, then back at Gabriel. He was covered in drywall, dust, blood, and sweat. He was going back into the city to finish a war. No, Evelyn said. Gabriel's brow furrowed. This isn't a negotiation. Volkov knows you're a player now. He'll hunt you. And he's hunting you, she countered, stepping closer to him. The night air was freezing, but the space between them was electric. You have soldiers, Gabriel. You have hitters. But you don't have anyone who can follow Volkov's money faster than he can move it. He tried to take my sister. I'm not sitting in a bunker while you do all the bleeding. He stared at her. The neon lights of the hospital parking structure painted half his face in harsh red. If you come with me, there is no plausible deniability left. You are an accessory to everything that happens next. The moment I picked up that gun, plausible deniability died, she said. She reached into his pocket and pulled out the Glock. She checked the safety just like he had taught her and slid it into the waistband of his oversized sweatpants she was wearing. I'm going to ruin him, Gabriel. I'm going to take every dime he has, and then you're going to take his life. Gabriel let out a low, rough breath. A dark, terrifying smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. He was looking at a woman who had just walked through the fire and realized she liked the heat. Get in the car, he said. The new safe house was a penthouse overlooking the Chicago River, registered to a shell corporation 3 layers deep in the Cayman Islands. It was a glass box in the sky, sterile and breathtaking. Gabriel threw his tactical vest onto the leather sofa. He poured 2 glasses of bourbon, neat, and set one next to the heavy mahogany dining table, where Evelyn was already setting up a secure laptop array. It was 4:15 a.m. The city below was entirely dark, unaware of the quiet war raging above it. Volkov operates his liquidity through Ethelgard Holdings, Evelyn said, her fingers flying across the keys. She didn't touch the bourbon. She was running on pure adrenaline and cold rage. But that's just the front. The real money, the capital he uses to pay his muscle, is tied up in a decentralized crypto exchange routed through a server farm in Estonia. Gabriel leaned over her chair, resting one hand on the table, the other on the back of her seat. He smelled of cordite and expensive cedar. Can you crack it? I don't have to crack it, Evelyn said, a cruel edge entering her voice. I just have to spoof his authentication protocols. He's been using the same holding company to mask his wire transfers for 2 years. He got lazy. She hit a final keystroke. The screen filled with lines of cascading green data. Numbers. Massive, staggering numbers. Millions of dollars sitting in digital escrow. He owes the Sinaloa cartel $3 million for the guns you stole. Evelyn murmured, her eyes tracking the data. If he doesn't pay them by morning, they won't care about his territory dispute in Chicago. They'll gut him, drain it, Gabriel commanded, his voice, a low rumble, vibrating against her shoulder. Drain it all. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She didn't think about the corporate ethics seminars or the neat legal boundaries of her old life. She initiated the transfer. She didn't steal the money for Gabriel. That would leave a trace. Instead, she scattered it. She routed the funds into 1,000 different micro-accounts belonging to legitimate, untraceable charities across the globe. She vaporized a Mafia empire with the stroke of an Enter key. Done, she whispered. The screen showed a 0 balance. Volkov is going to wake up a dead man, Gabriel said softly. He reached out and gently spun her chair around to face him. He braced his hands on the armrests, trapping her. He was kneeling slightly, bringing his face level with hers. You just dismantled the Eastern Bratva syndicate in 20 minutes, Gabriel said, his grey eyes searching hers. Men with guns have been trying to do that for a decade. Guns are loud, Evelyn replied, her breathing hitching as his gaze dropped to her lips. Numbers are quiet. You're not quiet anymore, Evelyn. He closed the distance. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was a collision. It held the desperate, frantic energy of the night, the fear, the violence, the absolute relief of survival. Gabriel's hands tangled in her hair, holding her securely as his mouth claimed hers. He tasted of bourbon and adrenaline. Evelyn kissed him back with equal ferocity. She grabbed the fabric of his t-shirt, pulling him closer, anchoring herself to the solid, dangerous reality of him. The cold, cynical world they lived in fell away, leaving only the heat between them. It was a surrender, not of power, but of pretense. She wasn't the secretary hiding in the shadows. She was exactly where she belonged. When Gabriel finally pulled back, they were both breathless. He rested his forehead against hers. Tomorrow, he murmured, his voice rough. I clean up the rest. I find Volkov before the cartel does, and I make sure he never looks at you or your sister again. Evelyn corrected softly. We clean it up. Gabriel looked at her, a slow, genuine smile breaking through his hardened features. It was Thursday morning. The Chicago skyline was a brilliant, unforgiving blue. The 42nd floor of the Mercer Tower was unrecognizable. The cleanup crew had worked a miracle. The shattered glass had been replaced, the bloodstains chemically lifted from the carpet, the drywall patched and painted. The heavy oak desk sat exactly where it always had, flanked by dual monitors. Evelyn stood in front of the desk. She was wearing a tailored black suit that cost more than her first car. The severe bun was gone. Her hair fell in loose, soft waves around her shoulders. She held a cup of black coffee, but her hands weren't shaking. Gabriel stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his executive suite, looking out over the city. He wore a pristine charcoal suit, the jacket perfectly fitted over his broad shoulders. There were no bruises visible. There was no blood. The city read the morning papers. A prominent real estate developer, Alexander Volkov, had been found dead in his Gold Coast mansion. The police suspected a cartel dispute over missing funds. A tragic, bloody end to a criminal life. The numbers had done their job. Gabriel had only needed to point the cartel in the right direction. The audit is complete, Evelyn said, breaking the silence. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The Ethelgard accounts have been scrubbed. The port manifests are perfectly balanced. The IRS won't find a single discrepancy. Gabriel turned away from the window. He walked slowly out of his office and into the reception area. He stopped in front of her desk. "You're very good at your job, Miss Cross," he said. The formal title was a joke, now an intimate echo of the life they had buried 2 nights ago. "I am," she agreed smoothly. He reached across the desk and picked up a heavy brass nameplate. It used to say, "Evelyn Cross, Executive Assistant." He tossed it into the trash can. It hit the bottom with a dull thud. "You're not sitting here anymore," Gabriel said. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Are you firing me, Gabriel?" "I'm promoting you." He walked around the desk, stopping mere inches from her. He reached out his knuckles, brushing lightly against the lapel of her new suit. "My empire needs a financial director. Someone who understands exactly how ugly the money is and knows exactly how to make it look beautiful." Evelyn looked up at him. She thought about her sister resting comfortably in the private clinic, her bills paid in perpetuity, from an offshore account that didn't exist. She thought about the power she had wielded in the dark penthouse, the terrifying thrill of tearing down a monster with keystrokes. She belonged in the light, but she thrived in his shadows. "I have a few conditions," Evelyn said, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips. "Name them," Gabriel replied, his eyes dark with promise. "I want a corner office. I want full access to the shadow ledgers. And I never ever want to see another cheap grey cardigan as long as I live." Gabriel chuckled a low, rich sound that warmed the sterile air of the 42nd floor. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a slow, claiming kiss that promised chaos and absolute devotion. "Done!" he murmured against her mouth. He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers, and led her away from the secretary's desk. They walked through the heavy glass doors of the executive suite, stepping into the seat of power together. The skyline outside belonged to Gabriel Mercer, but the man who owned the city now belonged entirely to the woman who kept his ledgers. By morning, everything had changed, and it was never going back. Did Evelyn's ruthless transformation from a quiet secretary to a mob queen leave you breathless? If you loved watching Gabriel and Evelyn burn down the criminal underworld to protect what's theirs, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Right now, we have more gritty, high-stakes, Mafia romance stories coming your way. Share this video with your friends who can't resist a morally grey hero and a brilliant, unstoppable heroine. Drop a comment below. What was your favorite moment of their explosive revenge? Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story.